Yeah, one of the things about practicing meditation is to recognize that, especially in the beginning phase of being a practitioner, that there are a lot of pitfalls. One of the pitfalls is to fall into the trap that anything that is occurring while you're focusing attention on the breath that draws your attention away from the breath is a distraction. And that's because you're just interpreting it the way that you have been conditioned to interpret anything that's happening that draws your attention away from where you have your attention. We're all conditioned to interpret that as a distraction. However, it is possible, whether we're talking about any sounds in the room or we're talking about any sensations in the body or any thoughts in the mind, any of that can be considered a distraction. However, in the practice of meditation, part of the practice is to be aware of all of the sensations, all of the sounds, all of the thoughts, all of the feelings that are occurring while you're sitting, and simply to include them. And even if you have the thought that this is a distraction, to include that as well as a thought. But it is possible, and this is what you discover through the practice, it is possible to be focused with your attention and be aware and not be distracted. And it is the truth that all that is occurring in awareness when we're practicing meditation is not a distraction. If it was a distraction, it would be something that was a quality of the sound itself. In other words, if that sound or the noises, there were people walking upstairs, if those noises, those sounds were objectively a distraction, then everyone in the room would experience a distraction. But that's not the case. For those of us who have been practicing this for a while, it's simply a sound. It's simply a sound. And it's possible to be aware of what's going on and have your focus of attention stay grounded on the breath without anything else that's going on draw your attention away. You can be aware of what's going on without having it take your attention. An example of what I'm talking about is that people who play professional sports, for example, if you're a baseball player or a football player or a tennis player, any kind of sport, and you're playing in a stadium where there are thousands of people, tremendous amount of noise. Right? As a matter of fact, in football games, as you may well know, if you're a football fan, the crowd tries to be part of the game by making a lot of noise to try and distract the quarterback or distract the players, right? But if you're a good, well-trained, well-practiced football player, you're aware of the noise, but it's not drawing your attention away from the game. That's what you practice when you do the practice in football. That's what you're practicing, have your attention stay in the game, have your attention stay on the field. In the same way, if you happen to be at a home game and the crowd is distracting the other team, or if you happen to be a home game and it's a big play that you want to make, sometimes you see the players do this, they bring the noise up, right? So they can actually use that to energize themselves. So one of the things the practice of meditation is about is being more masterful, being more skillful in being in the world and living in the world with an ability to focus your attention and not be distracted by thoughts, not be distracted by emotions, to be able to see things for what they actually are. And we've talked about this here before. If you see things for what they actually are, you understand that a thought is just a thought. It is not a fact. It's an interpretation about reality. And so if you're living your life by thinking, right, if you're living your life by using thinking to live your life, you're not actually being in the world, you're being in your head. And the world is in your head because it's a world of thoughts. Everything is thoughts. And then those thoughts are distorted by emotions. And that further distorts the thoughts. Right? If that becomes completely distorted and that becomes completely the world you're living in and you don't have much contact with what's actually happening around you at all, we call that psychosis, psychotic, right? That's a mental illness. Now, as a psychologist, one of the things that I would suggest to you is that although that's considered a mental illness, I consider what people consider to be a normal state of mind mental illness. And the reason I consider that people who are in a normal state of mind to be mentally ill is because they're living in an illusion about who they are. And they're living in an illusion about how the world is. The only thing is because that's something that is common among all of us, because it's because all human beings share this illusion about who they are. Not all human beings, but most human beings share this illusion about who they are and share this illusion about what's true and real and what the world is. That they call that normal, right? They call that normal. So if you're insane, but almost everybody else is insane, nobody's insane. Right? It's like the catch-22, if any of you are familiar with the catch-22 idea, right? If you're crazy and you know you're crazy, you're not crazy, right? So in meditation, what we're looking to do and what we're looking to practice is to break the spell, to come out of this way of being that's based on a misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding is that we think we're a physical body, that we think that we're this identity that we have come to learn to be, called a person or a personality. And this personality is unstable, right? If you pay any attention to your thought process, and your emotional experience, you'll see that it's always changing, isn't it? Your thoughts are always changing. Your emotions are always changing. Right? And many of the thoughts are disturbing, aren't they? And many of those disturbing thoughts are about you, aren't they? And many of the disturbing thoughts are about the world, right? And the reactions, right? The reactions. In other words, many thoughts are thoughts that are about you or about the world, but they're not just thoughts about you and about the world. They're judgments and evaluations, right? In other words, there are thoughts and there are interpretations, and then in addition to the thoughts, there is this judgment. You know, it's I have a thought about myself, and that thought may be that I don't like myself. That's a judgment, right? And so we go through life living in a world given by our thoughts, living in a world given by our feelings, living in a world given by our past, given by our conditioning. And this world that we're living in is a living hell in many respects, because it's full of confusion, it's totally unstable, it's full of constant judgment and evaluation. It's full of trying to control what can't be controlled. It's full of trying to avoid what feels threatening, right? Or what you don't like and what you don't want. It's full of trying to hold on to what you like and what you do want and what you think will give you security. And none of that works. You can't hold on to anything, right? Impermanence is a fact. Everything's changing all the time. Life is unpredictable. And we know that in time, we're living in time. The body's a time body. We know in time, life will come to an end. We'll die. We know we'll get old. We know we'll get sick. And we don't know what's going to happen next in our life, right? So that's the reality in which we live, right? So the question then becomes, well, how do you live in that reality and expect to have any degree of satisfaction, any degree of control, any degree of happiness, any degree of well-being? Well, in the world that I just described, the way people attempt to do that is by getting money, right? Is by trying to control the aging of the body, trying to control any threats that they are experiencing from other people or from anything in life around them, trying to get enough gratification and pleasure to be satisfied. This is a quote from one of my teachers that I came across this morning. Satisfaction is not out there. It cannot be brought in. You will never get satisfied. It cannot be done. When you want more and different or better, that is gratification. And while that is gratifying, we always want even more and even better. Satisfaction is completion, being complete. What has been called the peace that passeth all understanding. It is a condition of well-being, a sense of wholeness and of being complete right now, a context of certainty that right now is completely all right as right now, and that the next moment will similarly be fully itself. Not a judgment of good or bad, right or wrong, just what is. So what this is pointing to is consistent with the reason that we practice meditation. Because it's possible through practicing meditation, through moving attention away from the thinking process, by being still, it becomes possible to discover who you are and discover that who you are is not this physical body that is changing all the time. Who you are is not the personality that's constantly changing and unstable. Who you are is not the emotional process that goes on, but who you are is the awareness in which all that occurs. Right? This is not, once you look at this, if you really look at this, and when you practice meditation, it gets easier to see this because you have less noise, you have less interference with the other things that you normally pay attention to, you see. And when you begin to look at this, because things calm down, it starts to become obvious and evident that what you are is not the content of consciousness, but what you are is consciousness itself. And this consciousness, this awareness that we are, is stable. It does not change. It's the same all the time. It does not age. It does not suffer. It wants nothing. It's not going anywhere. It's not coming from anywhere. It is always satisfied. That's what this means when it says satisfaction is not out there, you know, it's not in the world, because that world is constantly changing. And whatever satisfies and gratifies you today in that world will not continue to do that. If you look at your life, you will see that this is the truth, right? This is the truth. Anything that you've ever gotten that you thought would satisfy you and gratify you didn't last for long, right? And so then where is satisfaction? Satisfaction is completion, being complete. What has been called the peace that passeth understanding. It's a condition of well-being. And this condition of well-being is the condition of who you actually are as awareness. Awareness is always well. It doesn't get sick. Right? And it's always there. It hasn't changed since you were a child. If you look at your awareness, you see that's exactly the same as it was when you were a kid, when you were a teenager, when you were a young adult, and right now. If you look at it right now, it's the same awareness. And so these are the reasons why meditation came into existence, because people who began to recognize, if any of you are familiar with the story of the Buddha is the story of the recognition that the life that most of human beings are experiencing is a life in which there is suffering. And in the life of the Buddha was seeking a way out of that suffering, right? And he did all kinds of things, practiced all kinds of things, until one day he got to a point where he said, I'm going to sit here and I'm either going to realize freedom, I'm either going to wake up from this bad dream, or I'll die here. And throughout that night, as he sat under this tree, all of his worst fears came up. All of his worst fears, his worst thoughts came up. And he just sat there, being still, being aware. And at some point, the house of cards fell. At some point, he became aware of the truth of himself as awareness itself. The field of awareness in which everything was occurring, the field of awareness that was unaffected by everything that was occurring. And so he was called the awakened one. The word Buddha means the awakened one. It's not his name. And there are many other people in history who have discovered this truth. Jesus Christ discovered this truth. And if you come to understand what we're practicing here, and you come to understand what it makes available, and then you read the words of Jesus Christ, they start to have a meaning that they didn't have before, because you're now relating to them consistent with your own experience instead of just believing and having faith. That's a different thing. So there's something available here. There's a possibility available here. And for those of you who are new, I see a few faces here of people that haven't been in the class on a regular basis. Since I've been teaching this class, I wrote a book that would kind of be a textbook for the class, right? And so I highly recommend that you get a hold of the book. It's called Dying to Live, and you can get it on Amazon. It's only like $3.50. But if you read that book, it'll give you a much more expanded explanation of what I'm talking about here. Because what I'm talking about here is something that if you start to get it, if you start to see what I'm pointing to, right, it will become evident to you that this is something that can offer you a kind of freedom that would otherwise not be available in your life. It will offer you a way of being healthy, offer you a way of being happy, offer you a way of getting free from the misery of the craziness that we see going on around us all the time, right? The misery of the craziness that we see going on around us all the time. And in the context of these teachings, anything that occurs in your life that causes pain or suffering or distress is seen as an opportunity to realize the possibility of being free from being affected by all that, instead of just suffering. So, any other questions about meditation or about the teachings? Meditation doesn't stand alone. I know that it is presented in the commercial world as stress reduction, and it is presented as if it stands alone. Just practice this and you'll feel better. Just practice this and you'll be calmer. And that's all true. But unless you understand that meditation came into existence as a practice that was attached to a teaching, it was being used as a way of having a direct experience of these teachings that came from masters, that came from people like Buddha and Jesus, who saw things clearly and recognized that human beings did not have to suffer. And it is possible to experience the truth. And the truth is that you are not a physical body. You have a body. And it's not hard to recognize that because you can't be something that you can see. If you can just get that, if you can just understand that. You can't be something that you can see. If you can see it, there's a distance between you and what you're looking at, right? And if you just apply that, you can see that you can't be your body. You can see you're aware of sensations in the body. You can look at the body, right? But your awareness is looking through the eyes. Awareness is using the ears to hear. The ears don't hear. The eyes don't see. Right? Once the life force leaves the body, the eyes of a dead person are still workable, but they don't see because the awareness has left the physical body. Right? So these are the things that come to be understood when you practice meditation. You begin to understand that most of the world is living in ignorance. Most of the world is ignoring the way things actually are. And it's possible for us to begin to see directly for ourselves the way things actually are and begin to live a different life in which happiness is a given, in which satisfaction is natural, and which your ability to be in the world but not of the world begins to appear. What does this mean in practical terms, right? Because I'm a psychologist and so I work with people to deal with practical concerns and considerations, right? It means that your relationships become more workable. It means that you're naturally happier. It means that you're physically healthier. It means that you're calmer. It means that you can be in acceptance with life. You could be with life the way life is. You're not in conflict with it. You're not struggling with it. You're not trying to change it all the time. It's kind of what's been talked about as the flow. You know, you can be in the flow of things instead of being resistance to what occurs in life. And so the practice of meditation is only going to be useful as a tool in this evolution and in this waking up process if it's done consistently. And that's why I say we have these 3 classes here a week, and now on Wednesday at 5 o'clock I do a Zoom class. So that's 4 opportunities a week to practice. But if you really start to see the truth and you really recognize the value of the truth and you really see that life can be fulfilling, then you'll start to practice meditation every single day because you'll understand the importance of it and the value of it. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Bob?
I recently saw an interview, Sadhguru, a spiritual teacher from India, on YouTube. He was asked, how much of your day do you spend thinking? And he said he hardly ever thinks. Most of his day is not spent thinking at all. He's just being. So it sounds like you describe your dog, he's just being. I guess I can't imagine that kind of life, but I guess it's just living a life where you're just in meditation, you're just in a flow. The only time he thinks is when he's doing some chore. He's preparing to get on a plane, or he's washing a dish, or something like that. How do you think one gets into that state?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that nobody's thinking. That's one of the things that you have to understand as a beginning understanding here, is that what you think is you thinking is not you thinking, right? What's actually happening is thoughts are happening in your mind, right? And you have been conditioned to believe that they're your thoughts, right? That you're thinking those thoughts. But what is true, if you look at it, is that the thought occurs in your mind and then you become aware of it. Not you don't cause it. You become aware of the thoughts. Do you not? You have a voice in your head, right? You look to see what it says, and then you believe you thought that thought. So that's one thing. But what he's talking about, what the Sadhguru is talking about, is he's not saying that there aren't thoughts going through his mind, right? But you see, he's clear that he is not thinking those thoughts, right? He's not saying that thoughts don't go through his mind. He's saying that he allows the thoughts to go through his mind, and only the ones that are relevant and useful are the ones he chooses to use. That's what he's saying. He's not saying, other than the time that he has to use a thought to do a simple chore, that other than that there's no thoughts there. That's the thing about these things that gets confusing for people. Thoughts just happen, right? As you practice meditation, thoughts continue to just happen. This is not about stopping thinking. This is not about controlling thoughts, right? Just like the idea of these sounds in the room, right? As you learn the truth, you realize that those sounds can occur and they don't have to be something that you engage with, that you don't have to give your attention to. The same thing is true with thoughts, right?
But if you're a creative person, let's say you're Einstein, you had to think up the theory of relativity, right?
Yeah.
That was you creating that thought.
Well, no, that wasn't you. If you read what Einstein wrote about his own process, right? He was aware of the thoughts that occurred. He had an intention, right? He had questions, scientific questions about relativity and so forth, right? And he posed those questions, and then he waited and became aware of thoughts that sprung up in his mind relative to answering those questions. But he wasn't working. He wasn't working at thinking. He was being open and aware of the possibility that thoughts could occur that would reveal the true nature of reality. That's the way it occurred.
You're writing a book. When you're writing your book, aren't you using your creative thinking process?
No, it's using me. It's using me. I'm just being open and asking, and this is, I'm telling you my direct experience, right? When I wrote this book that I just mentioned, right, I sat and had a question, right? What can I say that will be the most effective and direct way of expressing the truth that I understand, right? And then I just stayed open, and the thoughts came through me, and then I wrote them down. That's how it actually happens. You know, people that perform at a very high level, if you ask somebody who is a star quarterback, right, if he's thinking about what he's going to do on the field, he'll tell you no, he can't think about what he's going to do on the field. It's happening too fast. He's just being there. He's got a highly trained body. He's got a brain that learned all these ways of acting on the field. And when the ball gets passed, that's what happens. That's why people who play a very high level of sports say how much fun it is, right? Because the game is being played through them, not by them. So you just have to stay with this stuff for a while and use meditation to develop a direct perception of it for yourself.
So it's more inspiration.
Well, it's not even a matter of inspiration, it's a matter of presence. You're simply present with a high intention, right? Present with a high intention, so that what is available, you see, once you experience who you are beyond the limitations of your mind, you now have access to an infinite amount of information. That's what Einstein knew. Okay, we got to stop because some of us go to a Tai Chi Chuan practice at Rose Tree Park, which is at 10 o'clock. See you next time.